The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty wooden platform, and Willa Lancaster pressed one trembling hand to her stomach, feeling the slight swell beneath her travel-worn dress that held her most devastating secret. She stepped down from the coach into the bright afternoon sun of Bodie, California, her legs unsteady after 3 weeks of rattling over rough roads from Boston. The year was 1878, and she had traveled across the entire continent to marry a man she had never met, carrying another man's child in her womb. The weight of her deception sat heavy on her shoulders, but what choice did she have? Charles had promised to marry her, had sworn his devotion right up until the moment he learned she was with child. Then he had disappeared like morning mist, leaving her ruined and desperate. The mining town of Bodie sprawled before her in all its rough glory, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada. Even in the fading light of late afternoon, she could hear the distant sounds of mining operations, the shouts of men, and the occasional gunshot that made her flinch. This was nothing like the orderly streets of Boston, nothing like the life she had known. "Miss Lancaster?" a deep voice asked, and she turned to see a tall man approaching. He was perhaps 28 or 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt. His eyes were an unexpected green, startling against his tanned face, and they regarded her with an openness that made her chest tighten with guilt. This was him. This was Thomas Jennings, the cowboy who had placed an advertisement for a wife, whose letters over the past 4 months had been kind and thoughtful and full of hope for their future together. "Mr. Jennings," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and impossibly handsome. "Please call me Thomas, or Tom if you prefer. I am mighty glad you made it here safely. The journey must have been difficult." "It was long," she admitted, accepting his offered arm. His strength was evident even through the fabric of his sleeve, and she felt a pang of shame at what she was about to do to this good man. But she had no choice. She had no money to return to Boston, no family who would take her in once her condition became known. This marriage was her only hope of survival, of giving her child a chance at life. Thomas guided her toward a wagon hitched nearby, his movements careful and considerate. "I hope my letters gave you some idea of what to expect here in Bodie. It is not refined like the eastern cities, but there are good people here, and the land has a beauty all its own if you know how to look for it." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He helped her into the wagon seat with gentle hands, then climbed up beside her. As they rolled through the dusty streets, he pointed out various landmarks: the general store, the church where they would be married tomorrow, the doctor's office, the schoolhouse. "The ranch is about 3 miles outside of town," Thomas explained, guiding the horses with practiced ease. "It is not much yet, but I have been building it up these past 5 years. Got about 200 head of cattle, some horses, and a house that is solid and warm. I built it myself, thinking one day I might have a family to fill it." His words were like knives in her heart. She had to tell him. She knew she had to tell him before the wedding, before he made vows to her under false pretenses. But fear kept her silent as they traveled out of town and into the rolling hills beyond. The landscape was stark and beautiful, golden grass waving in the evening breeze, mountains rising purple in the distance. The ranch house came into view as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was a simple 2-story structure, but solidly built, with a wide porch and real glass windows that reflected the dying light. There was a barn nearby, corrals, and a small bunkhouse where she assumed Thomas employed a few ranch hands. "It is lovely," Willa said, and meant it. Thomas beamed with pride. "I've been working on it for years, always imagining sharing it with someone. I fixed up the bedroom upstairs for you, painted it and everything. Figured you would want your own space until after the wedding, so I will sleep in the spare room downstairs." His consideration made her want to weep. She had expected someone rough, maybe even cruel, given the stories she had heard about the West. Instead, she had found a gentleman who was trying his best to make her comfortable despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. An older woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She had gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through Willa. "This is Martha Kane," Thomas said. "She runs the boarding house in town, but she agreed to come out and help you get settled, make sure everything is proper." Martha nodded at Willa, her expression neutral. "Miss Lancaster, I will be staying here tonight to chaperone, then I will stand witness at your wedding tomorrow if that suits." "Thank you," Willa said softly, grateful and terrified all at once. That evening, Martha prepared a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Thomas was attentive without being overbearing, asking Willa about her journey, about Boston, about her family. She told him the truth about most things. That her parents had died 2 years ago in a typhoid outbreak, that she had been living with an aunt who made it clear she was a burden, that she had hoped for a fresh start in the West. She just left out the most important part, the secret that was growing larger every day. When Martha showed her to the upstairs bedroom after dinner, Willa finally allowed herself to breathe. The room was indeed freshly painted, a soft cream color that caught the lamplight warmly. There was a real bed with a quilted coverlet, a washstand with a china basin and pitcher, a chest of drawers, and even a small bookshelf with a few worn volumes. "He is a good man," Martha said bluntly, closing the door behind them. "Better than most around here. I have known Tom Jennings since he came to Bodie 5 years ago, and he has always been honest and hardworking. He will treat you well, if you treat him fairly." The emphasis on those last words made Willa look up sharply, but Martha's expression was unreadable. "I intend to be a good wife," Willa said quietly. "See that you are." Martha's voice softened slightly. "Life out here is hard enough without secrets and lies between a husband and wife. Whatever burdens you carry, best to lay them out before you make your vows. Tom deserves that much." Willa felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. "I know." After Martha left, Willa sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded over her stomach. The baby was perhaps 3 months along now, still small enough to hide beneath the right clothing, but that would not last much longer. She had perhaps a month, maybe 6 weeks if she was lucky, before her condition would become obvious to anyone who looked. She had to tell Thomas. Tomorrow, before the wedding, she would find the courage to tell him the truth and accept whatever consequences came. If he turned her away, well, perhaps she could find work somewhere, somehow, though she knew how unlikely that was for a woman alone and with child. Sleep eluded her for most of the night. She tossed and turned, rehearsing a dozen different ways to confess her secret, each one sounding more pathetic than the last. When dawn finally crept through the window, she rose feeling exhausted and sick, though she could not tell if the nausea was from the pregnancy or from dread. Martha brought her a simple breakfast of toast and tea, seeming to sense that Willa's stomach could not handle anything heavier. "The wedding is set for 2 o'clock, she said. "That gives you time to rest and prepare yourself." "Martha," Willa began, then hesitated. "I need to speak with Thomas alone this morning, before the wedding. It is important." Something flickered in Martha's eyes, understanding perhaps, or maybe confirmation of suspicions she had already held. "I will arrange it. After breakfast, I will go check on preparations at the church and give you some privacy." "Thank you," Willa whispered. True to her word, Martha left after the breakfast dishes were cleared, driving the wagon back toward town and leaving Willa alone with Thomas. He was in the barn tending to the horses when she found him, pitching fresh hay with easy, economical movements. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway, and his face brightened with a smile that made her heart crack. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I hope you slept well." "Thomas, I need to talk to you." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Please, it is important." He must have heard something in her tone because his smile faded into concern. He set down the pitchfork and came toward her, pulling off his work gloves. "Of course. What is it? Are you having second thoughts about the wedding? Because if you are, I will understand. I know this has all been rushed and we barely know each other. If you need more time, we can wait." "No, it is not that." She forced herself to look at him, to meet those kind green eyes. "Thomas, I have not been honest with you. There is something you need to know before you decide whether you still want to marry me." His brow furrowed, but he nodded. "All right, tell me." She took a deep breath, pressing one hand to her stomach in an unconscious gesture. "I am with child. About 3 months along. The father was a man in Boston who promised to marry me, but when he learned of the pregnancy, he left. I came here hoping to make a new start, but I realize now how unfair it was of me to deceive you. If you want to call off the wedding, I understand completely. I will find some way to manage." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Thomas stood very still, his expression unreadable. Willa felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. She had done what she came to do, told the truth, and now she would face the consequences. When Thomas finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "Yes," she said quickly. "I was going to tell you before the wedding. That is why I asked to speak with you this morning. I could not let you marry me without knowing the truth. I am sorry, Thomas. I should have written to you about this before I ever made the journey, but I was desperate and scared, and I made a terrible choice. I understand if you hate me." He shook his head slowly. "I do not hate you." He was quiet for another long moment, then he asked, "This man in Boston, the father, is there any chance he will come looking for you?" "No. He made it very clear he wanted nothing to do with me or the child. And you have no family, no one else to turn to." "No one." Thomas walked over to a bench against the barn wall and sat down heavily. Willa remained standing, her whole body tense, waiting for him to tell her to leave, to get out of his sight. Instead, he looked up at her with those impossibly green eyes and said, "That child will be mine too." Willa's breath caught. "What?" "If you will still have me, Willa, I would be honored to marry you this afternoon. And that baby you are carrying, from this day forward, that child will be mine. I will raise it as my own, love it as my own, and no one ever needs to know different." "You cannot mean that," she whispered, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do such a thing?" He stood and crossed to her, stopping just a few feet away. "I wrote to you looking for a wife because I am tired of being alone. I have built this ranch, this life, but it all feels empty without someone to share it with. Your letters these past months have been the bright spot in my days. You wrote about books and ideas, about wanting to see the world, about hoping to find a place where you belong. I felt like I was beginning to know you, the real you, and I liked what I saw. But the baby," she protested weakly. "The baby is part of you, so the baby is part of our future if you will have me. I will not pretend this is not complicated, and I will not pretend I am not surprised. But I meant what I said in my letters, Willa. I want a family, and if that family starts with a child you are already carrying, then so be it. That child will never know anything but love from me. I give you my word." Willa could not stop the sob that escaped her throat. All the fear and tension of the past months, all the sleepless nights and desperate worry, came pouring out in a flood of tears. Thomas stepped forward hesitantly, then gathered her into his arms, holding her while she wept against his chest. "It is all right," he murmured, one hand gently stroking her back. "It will all be all right. You are safe now. Both of you are safe." When she finally regained control of herself, she pulled back enough to look up at him. His shirt was damp with her tears, but he did not seem to mind. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Truly certain? Because once we are married, I will do everything I can to be a good wife to you, Thomas. I will not take this gift lightly." "I am certain," he said firmly. "Now you should go back to the house and rest. We have a wedding this afternoon, and you look like you could use some sleep." The wedding took place at 2 o'clock in the small church in Bodie, with Martha and the preacher's wife standing as witnesses. Willa wore the best dress she owned, a simple blue calico that she had let out slightly in the waist that morning. Thomas wore clean trousers and a pressed white shirt, his dark hair neatly combed. The ceremony itself was brief, but when Thomas took her hands in his and spoke his vows, Willa heard the sincerity in his voice. He promised to love and cherish her, to provide for her, to stand by her in sickness and health. When it was her turn, she spoke her own vows with equal sincerity, promising to honor him, to be faithful to him, to build a life with him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her gently, chastely, and Willa felt something shift in her chest. This was real. She was married. She had a home. Her child would have a father. They held a small reception at the boarding house, which Martha had arranged. A few of Thomas's friends from town came to wish them well, ranchers and miners and shop owners who seemed genuinely happy for Thomas. They welcomed Willa warmly, their frontier hospitality making her feel less like an outsider than she had expected. As the sun began to set, Thomas drove them back to the ranch, now their home. Willa felt nerves flutter in her stomach as they approached, unsure what to expect from their wedding night given the unusual circumstances. Thomas seemed to sense her anxiety. As he helped her down from the wagon, he said quietly, "I know this is all strange and new. I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you tonight or any night until you are ready. We can take this as slow as you need." His consideration made her eyes sting with fresh tears. "You are too good to me. I am just trying to be a good husband," he said simply. That night, they sat together in the parlor, talking by lamplight. Thomas told her about his life before Bodie, growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to cholera when he was 20, drifting west in search of something he could not quite name. He had worked as a ranch hand, a cattle driver, even tried his hand at mining before deciding to start his own spread here in California. Willa told him more about Boston, about her childhood, about her parents, and how much she still missed them. She told him about her love of reading, how she had devoured every book she could get her hands on growing up. Thomas listened with genuine interest, asking questions, seeming to truly want to know her. When exhaustion finally overtook them both, Thomas showed her to the upstairs bedroom again. "This is your room," he said. "I will be downstairs if you need anything." "Thomas," she said as he turned to go. When he looked back, she continued, "Thank you for everything, for giving me a chance when you had every right to turn me away." He smiled, that warm smile that lit up his whole face. "We are family now, Willa. You and me and the little one on the way. That is all that matters." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Thomas rose early to tend to the ranch, working with his two hired hands, Miguel and Robert, to manage the cattle and horses. Willa worked to make the house a home, cooking meals, tending a small vegetable garden that was already established, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Slowly, carefully, they began to build a relationship. Thomas never pushed her, never demanded anything she was not ready to give. He treated her with unfailing kindness and respect, talking with her over meals, sharing his thoughts and dreams, listening to hers. Willa found herself drawn to him more each day. She watched him work with the horses, patient and gentle even with the most skittish animals. She saw how he treated Miguel and Robert with fairness and dignity, paying them well and respecting their skill. She heard how people in town spoke of him with genuine liking and respect. About 2 weeks after the wedding, Willa woke in the middle of the night feeling ill. She barely made it to the wash basin before she was sick, her body shaking with the force of it. She tried to be quiet, but moments later she heard footsteps on the stairs and Thomas appeared in the doorway, his hair mussed from sleep. "Willa, are you all right?" "I am fine," she managed weakly. "Just the morning sickness, though it seems to have come in the middle of the night." He came into the room without hesitation, gently pulling her hair back from her face and holding it while she was sick again. When the worst had passed, he helped her to the bed, then went downstairs to fetch cool water and a clean cloth. He sat beside her, carefully wiping her face, his touch tender. "Has it been bad?" he asked softly. "Not too terrible. Worse in the mornings usually, but sometimes at night like this." "You should have told me. Maybe there is something we can do to help." "There is not much to be done. It should pass in another month or so, or at least that is what the books say." Thomas smiled slightly. "You and your books. I like that about you, you know. That you are always reading, always learning things. You do not think it is unladylike. I think it is wonderful. I only wish I had more books to offer you. I am not much of a reader myself, but I could order some from San Francisco if you tell me what you would like." Willa felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That is very kind of you." He stayed with her until she fell asleep, sitting in the chair by the window, keeping watch. When she woke in the morning, he was gone, but there was a cup of ginger tea on the bedside table, still warm, with a note in his careful handwriting. "Martha says this helps with the sickness. Rest as much as you need." It was small gestures like this that began to chip away at the walls around Willa's heart. Thomas was not a demonstrative man, did not speak flowery words of love, but he showed his care in 100 small ways. He made sure she had the best cuts of meat at dinner. He noticed when she shivered in the evening and built up the fire without being asked. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, awkwardly presenting them with a shy smile. One evening about a month after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Thomas said, "We should probably let people know about the baby soon. You are starting to show, and folks will notice before long." Willa looked down at her stomach, which had definitely rounded in the past weeks. "What should we tell them?" "The truth, mostly. That you are with child and we are expecting a baby in the winter. No one needs to know the timing is a bit unusual. Let them assume what they will." "Will they judge us?" Thomas shrugged. "Some might, but most folks have their own troubles to worry about, and anyone who says anything unkind will answer to me." The protective note in his voice made Willa's heart skip. She reached out impulsively and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. He looked surprised but pleased, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "I am starting to feel lucky," she said softly. "Is that strange? I came here under such terrible circumstances, but now, with you, I feel like maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to." Thomas turned to look at her, his green eyes serious. "I feel lucky too. Every day, I wake up and think about how glad I am that you answered my advertisement, that you took a chance on coming out here. Even with the complications. Especially with the complications. Nothing worth having comes easy, Willa. I learned that a long time ago." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, until the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The next Sunday, they went to church together in town. Willa wore her loosest dress, but she could tell from the sharp glances of some of the women that her condition was becoming apparent. After the service, Thomas made a point of mentioning to several people that they would be welcoming a new addition to the family in the winter, his arm protectively around Willa's shoulders. Most of the responses were warm, with women offering advice and congratulations. A few of the older matrons looked disapproving, clearly doing mental calculations about the timing, but when they saw how Thomas stood by Willa, how openly he claimed both her and the coming child, they kept their thoughts to themselves. Martha cornered Willa outside the church. "How are you feeling, my dear?" "Better now. The sickness has mostly passed." "Good, and you and Tom are getting on well." Willa smiled, a real smile that came from deep inside. "Very well. He is a good man, Martha, better than I deserve." Martha patted her hand. "You both deserve happiness. I am glad to see you finding it." As fall deepened into winter, Willa's pregnancy became more obvious. She moved more slowly now, her belly swelling with the growing child. Thomas became even more protective, insisting she rest frequently, taking over many of the household chores she had assumed. He also began preparing for the baby in earnest. In the evenings after dinner, Willa would sit and read while Thomas worked in the corner of the parlor, building a beautiful wooden cradle. She watched his hands, strong and capable, carefully sanding and fitting each piece, and felt her heart swell with affection for this man who was claiming her child as his own. One evening in early November, as snow began to fall outside, Willa set down her book and said, "Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really do this? Accept me and the baby. You could have sent me away, found another woman to marry, someone without complications." He set down the piece of wood he was sanding and looked at her thoughtfully. "Do you remember in one of your letters, you wrote about feeling like you were always on the outside of your own life, watching it happen but never really being part of it?" She nodded, surprised he had remembered such a small detail. "I felt that way too for years, just going through the motions, working and surviving but not really living. When I read your letters, I felt like I was connecting with someone who understood that feeling. And I thought maybe together we could both find a way to stop being on the outside, to really be present in our lives." "And do you feel that way now?" she asked softly. "Present in your life," he smiled. "More than I ever have before. You make everything feel real, Willa. You and this little one on the way, you have given me something to work for, something that matters." Willa stood, moving carefully across the room to where he sat. She cupped his face in her hands, looking into his eyes. "I am falling in love with you, Thomas Jennings. I thought you should know that." His eyes widened, then filled with an emotion so intense it took her breath away. "Willa," he whispered, "I have been falling in love with you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach looking so scared and brave at the same time." She leaned down and kissed him, really kissed him for the first time since their wedding day. He stood, his arms coming around her carefully, mindful of her belly, and kissed her back with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I want this to be a real marriage, Willa, in every way, but only if that is what you want too." "It is what I want," she assured him. "I want to be your wife, truly your wife." That night, Willa did not go upstairs to the bedroom that had been hers alone. She followed Thomas to his room, the master bedroom on the first floor, and they consummated their marriage with a gentleness and care that left her feeling cherished and whole. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Willa's life. She and Thomas had truly become partners, lovers, friends. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their days and their dreams. Thomas would come in from working the ranch and find her reading, and he would sit beside her and ask her to tell him about the book. genuinely interested even when it was some dense philosophical text. She, in turn, began to learn about the ranch, about the cattle and the land. Thomas taught her to ride, patient with her awkwardness, praising every small success. Even pregnant, she found joy in the freedom of riding across the golden hills, Thomas always beside her, ready to catch her if she stumbled. As Christmas approached, Willa realized with wonder that she was truly happy. She had a home, a husband who loved her, and soon she would have a child. The circumstances of the baby's conception no longer seemed to matter. This was Thomas's child in every way that counted. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged gifts. Willa had knitted Thomas a warm scarf and gloves, working on them in secret whenever he was out on the range. He gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of books he had ordered from San Francisco, classic novels she had mentioned wanting to read. "There is one more thing," he said, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a chain. "I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something special." "It is beautiful," Willa breathed, running her fingers over the smooth gold. Thomas took it from the box and fastened it around her neck. "I was thinking maybe someday we could put a picture of our family inside. You and me and the baby and any other children we might have." "Other children," Willa smiled. "You want more, if you do." "I would like a whole houseful if we are blessed that way." Willa turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. "I would like that too. A house full of children growing up here on the ranch, running wild and free." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Willa. I know I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I thought possible." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. In late January, as a winter storm howled outside, Willa went into labor. Thomas rode into town through the snow to fetch the doctor, a kindly older man named Samuel Fletcher who had delivered half the babies in Bodie. Martha came as well, and together they helped Willa through the long hours of labor. Thomas stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement. When she screamed with the pain of contractions, he never flinched, just held her tighter and told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. As dawn broke on a cold January morning, their son was born. He came into the world squalling, his tiny fists waving, his face red and furious. Dr. Fletcher placed him in Willa's arms, and she looked down at the tiny miracle, feeling overwhelmed with love. "He is perfect," she breathed. Thomas leaned over them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. "He is beautiful, just like his mother." "What will you name him?" Martha asked, smiling at the little family. Willa looked up at Thomas. They had discussed names, but she suddenly knew what she wanted. "I would like to name him after you, if that is all right. Thomas Jennings, Jr." Thomas's face transformed with emotion. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. He is your son, Thomas. In every way that matters, he is yours." Thomas bent and kissed her forehead, then gently touched the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, Thomas Jr. Your mother and I have been waiting for you." The baby seemed to calm at the sound of Thomas's voice, his tiny face turning toward the sound. Thomas carefully took him from Willa's arms, holding the infant with surprising confidence. He looked down at his son, and Willa saw the moment when the reality of fatherhood truly hit him. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks, and he made no move to wipe them away. "I promise you," Thomas said softly to the baby, "I will always protect you. I will always love you. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that." Dr. Fletcher and Martha discreetly left the room, giving them privacy. Willa watched as Thomas paced slowly, rocking the baby, humming some tuneless melody. Her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "Come here," she said, patting the bed beside her. Thomas carefully settled next to her, still cradling baby Thomas in his arms. They sat together, the three of them, and watched the winter sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The early weeks with a newborn were exhausting but joyful. Thomas insisted on helping with everything, changing diapers, walking the floor with the baby during crying spells, bringing Thomas Jr. to Willa for feeding in the middle of the night. He was a natural father, patient and loving, and Willa fell even more deeply in love with him watching him with their son. When spring came and the snow melted, Thomas took them both out to see the ranch. He carried the baby in his arms, pointing out the horses and cattle, telling him about the land, about the life they would build together. Baby Thomas seemed fascinated by everything, his dark blue eyes wide as they took in the world. "I was thinking," Thomas said one warm April evening as they sat on the porch, the baby sleeping peacefully in Willa's arms. "Maybe we should expand the house. Add a few more bedrooms, a bigger kitchen. If we are going to have more children, we will need the space." Willa smiled. "Are we going to have more children? I hope so, if you are willing." He reached over and took her free hand. "I want everything with you, Willa. More children, a lifetime together, growing old on this ranch we are building." "That sounds perfect," she said softly. True to his word, Thomas began expanding the house that summer. With help from Miguel and Robert, he added 2 more bedrooms upstairs and enlarged the kitchen. Willa watched the house grow, thinking about how her life had grown and expanded in ways she never could have imagined when she first stepped off that stagecoach in Bodie. Baby Thomas was a happy, healthy child who grew quickly. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, his curiosity endless. He had Thomas's green eyes and Willa's dark hair, and everyone who saw them together remarked on how much the boy resembled his father. No one ever questioned the truth of his parentage. In the fall of 1880, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, no shame, only joy. Thomas was delighted, already talking about whether it would be a boy or a girl, making plans to build more furniture, dreaming about their growing family. Their daughter, Emma Catherine Jennings, was born in early May of 1881, arriving on a beautiful spring morning with far less drama than her brother. She had blonde hair like Willa's mother had and Thomas's green eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment he first held her. "2 children," Thomas said in wonder, holding Emma while young Thomas played at his feet. "I am the luckiest man alive." Willa leaned against him, feeling completely content. "We are all lucky." The years passed in a blur of happy chaos. Young Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Emma was sweet and gentle, preferring books and quiet play, though she could hold her own when her brother got too rough. In 1883, Willa gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Daniel, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischievous antics. Thomas built onto the house again, laughing that they were going to need a whole wing at this rate. Through it all, the love between Willa and Thomas only deepened. They had built something real and lasting, a family and a life that was everything they had both dreamed of and more. One evening in the summer of 1885, Willa stood on the porch watching Thomas play with their children in the yard. Young Thomas, now 7, was teaching the twins to rope a fence post while Emma sat nearby reading a book, occasionally looking up to laugh at her brother's antics. Martha, who had become a regular visitor and dear friend over the years, came to stand beside Willa. "You look happy," Martha observed. "I am," Willa said simply, "more than I ever thought possible." It is a far cry from that scared young woman who stepped off the stagecoach 7 years ago. Willa nodded, thinking about that day, about how terrified and desperate she had been. I thought my life was over. I thought the worst thing in the world had happened to me. And now I know that sometimes what seems like the end is really just a beginning. Everything that happened, all the pain and fear and uncertainty led me here. Led me to Thomas, to this life, to these beautiful children. I would not change any of it. Martha squeezed her hand. He is a good man. The best, Willa agreed. He took a chance on me when he had every reason not to. He loved me and my son when he could have turned us away. He gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. As if he heard her speaking about him, Thomas looked up from where he was wrestling playfully with the boys. His eyes found hers across the yard, and he smiled, that warm smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. She smiled back, and in that moment, everything that had brought them to this place felt like destiny. That night, after the children were all asleep, Willa and Thomas sat together in their bedroom. Thomas was reading through accounts from the ranch, which had prospered and grown over the years, while Willa worked on a quilt for their bed. "You ever think about him?" Thomas asked suddenly. "The man in Boston." Willa set down her needle, surprised by the question. They never spoke of Charles, had not mentioned him in years. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but only to think how grateful I am that he left. If he had married me, I would never have found you. I would never have had this life." Thomas set aside his papers and came to sit beside her on the bed. "I am glad, too. I know that is selfish, but I am glad everything worked out the way it did. I cannot imagine my life without you and the children. It is not selfish. It is just honest." Willa reached up and touched his face, running her fingers along the lines that sun and time had etched there. "You know, when you first said that baby Thomas would be yours too, I could not believe it. I could not understand why you would take on that burden. It was never a burden, Willa. I know that now, but then I thought you were either incredibly noble or completely foolish." Thomas smiled. "Maybe I was both." "No," she said firmly. "You were brave. You were kind. You were everything I needed, even when I did not know what I needed. You saved us, Thomas. Young Thomas and me both." "You saved me too," he said quietly. "I was just going through the motions before you came, building a ranch but not really building a life. You gave me purpose, gave me a family. You made everything matter." They kissed, a sweet kiss full of years of love and trust and partnership. When they parted, Willa rested her head on his shoulder, feeling completely at peace. "You think we will have more children?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. Thomas laughed. "4 is not enough for you." "I am just asking. You were the one who said you wanted a houseful." "I did say that, did I not?" He wrapped his arms around her, careful of the slight swell of her belly that neither had mentioned yet, though both had noticed. "Well, I have never been one to go back on my word." Willa smiled against his shoulder, thinking about the new life growing inside her, their 5th child, conceived in love and wanted with their whole hearts. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Young Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and showing a natural talent for managing cattle and horses. Emma proved to have a brilliant mind, devouring every book she could find and eventually becoming a teacher at the school in Bodie. The twins, Matthew and Daniel, were inseparable, always getting into some adventure or another, but they were good boys with kind hearts. And little Sarah, born in 1886, became the baby of the family, sweet and spirited and adored by all her older siblings. In 1895, when young Thomas was 17, he came to his parents with a question. "I was wondering," he said, a bit nervously, "about my birth. I know I was born just about 7 months after you and Mother got married." Willa and Thomas exchanged a look. They had always known this conversation might come someday. "You are right," Thomas said calmly. "You were conceived before your mother and I married. So you are not my real father." Thomas reached out and gripped his son's shoulder firmly. "I am your real father in every way that matters. I have loved you from the moment you were born, raised you, taught you everything I know. Blood does not make a family, son. Love does. Your biological father was a man in Boston who left before you were born," Willa added gently. "He wanted nothing to do with either of us. But Thomas, your father, chose us. He chose to love us and care for us when he did not have to." Young Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he looked at Thomas with suspiciously bright eyes. "You took us in even though we were not your responsibility." "You were my responsibility from the moment I decided to marry your mother," Thomas corrected. "And more than that, you were my son from the moment I held you. Nothing about our biology changes that." Young Thomas embraced his father tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for choosing us." "Best decision I ever made," Thomas said, holding his son close. Willa watched them, tears streaming down her face. After all these years, the love in this family they had built still overwhelmed her sometimes. In 1896, young Thomas met a girl named Alice from one of the neighboring ranches, and they began courting. Watching her eldest son fall in love reminded Willa of her own early days with Thomas, the tentative steps toward trust and affection that had blossomed into something beautiful. The wedding took place in the spring of 1897, a joyous celebration that brought together the whole community. As Willa watched young Thomas and Alice exchange vows, she felt Thomas's hand slip into hers. "Hard to believe our boy is all grown up," he murmured. "I know. It seems like just yesterday he was a tiny baby in my arms." "We did well with him," Thomas said. "With all of them." Willa nodded, looking around at their children. Emma was there with the young rancher she had been seeing, looking radiant and happy. The twins were horsing around with Sarah, making her giggle. They were all healthy, happy, loved. "We did very well," she agreed. That night back at the ranch, Willa and Thomas sat on the porch watching the stars. It was something they had done countless times over the years, finding peace in the quiet darkness and each other's company. "You remember the first time we sat here like this?" Thomas asked. "The night you told me you were falling in love with me." "Of course I remember. It was one of the happiest moments of my life." "Mine too." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I have been thinking lately about how different my life could have been if you had not answered my advertisement, or if I had turned you away when you told me about the baby. I think about that sometimes too, how close I came to losing all of this before I even had it." "I am glad you took a chance on me," Thomas said. "Glad you trusted me with your truth." "I am glad you said those words," Willa replied. "That child will be mine too." 5 words that changed everything. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. After 20 years of marriage, they had long since mastered the art of companionable quiet, of being together without needing to fill every moment with words. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Willa and Thomas celebrated their 22nd anniversary. Their ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the region. Their children were all thriving, and their love had only deepened with time. They threw a party, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. Martha was there, older now but still sharp and kind. Dr. Fletcher came, along with dozens of others who had been part of their lives over the years. Young Thomas and Alice were there with their 2 children, making Willa and Thomas grandparents twice over. Emma brought her rancher, officially introducing him as her fiancé. The twins, now young men of 19, were charming all the young ladies. And Sarah, 14 and beautiful, was the belle of the ball. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Willa found herself standing with Thomas in the middle of the room they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created. "Happy anniversary," Thomas said, pulling her into his arms for a dance even though the music had stopped. "Happy anniversary," she replied, swaying with him to a melody only they could hear. "Any regrets?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Not a single one. You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Willa laughed. "We met exactly when we were supposed to. Everything happened exactly as it should have." "I suppose you are right," he kissed her softly. "Here is to the next 22 years. And beyond," she added. As they danced in the lamplight, surrounded by the family and home they had built together, Willa thought about that scared young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Bodie so many years ago. She had been desperate and alone, carrying a child and a secret that should have doomed her. Instead, she had found Thomas, a man who had looked past her circumstances and seen her worth. A man who had claimed her child as his own without hesitation or reservation. A man who had loved her faithfully through the years, through joy and sorrow, through triumph and struggle. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. Their children would carry on the legacy of love and acceptance they had started, would teach their own children the values of kindness and loyalty and choosing love over fear. In 1910, on their 32nd anniversary, Willa and Thomas sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, older now but no less devoted to each other. Young Thomas was running the ranch with his own sons helping. Emma had become a respected educator with children of her own. The twins had started their own ranch together with their wives, and Sarah had married a lawyer from Sacramento and was living a life of adventure and purpose. "We have been blessed," Willa said, reaching over to take Thomas's hand. "More than blessed," Thomas agreed. "We have been downright lucky." "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Willa asked. "I think about how you could have said no that day in the barn when I told you I was pregnant. You could have sent me away and no one would have blamed you." "I could have," Thomas acknowledged. "But then I would have missed out on the greatest adventure of my life. I would have missed loving you, raising our children, building this life. I would have missed everything that matters." "That child will be mine too," Willa quoted softly. "Those were the words that started everything." "And I meant every single one," Thomas said. "Young Thomas is mine, just as much as Emma or the twins or Sarah. They are all mine and you are mine, and I am the luckiest man who ever lived." Willa leaned over and kissed him, this man who had given her everything, who had loved her when she thought she was unlovable, who had built a family with her from the broken pieces of her past. "I love you, Thomas Jennings. Today, tomorrow, and always." "I love you too, Willa. Forever." As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they sat together hand in hand. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. Their story had started with fear and desperation, with secrets and uncertainty. But it had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of choosing love over judgment, acceptance over rejection, hope over despair. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not how they had started, but what they had built together. Not the circumstances that had brought them together, but the love they had chosen to nurture and grow. Not the mistakes of the past, but the grace and forgiveness they had shown each other in creating their future. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who carried their legacy. But their greatest legacy was not the land or the cattle or the buildings they had constructed. It was the love they had shared, the family they had built, and the example they had set of what it meant to truly honor the vows they had made to each other all those years ago. When Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1918 at the age of 68, Willa held his hand and whispered words of love, thanking him for every day they had shared together. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them evidence of the beautiful life she and Thomas had created. On her own deathbed in 1923, with young Thomas, now a gray-haired man of 45, sitting beside her, Willa smiled and said, "Tell them all about your father. Tell them how he loved us, how he chose us. Tell them that family is not about blood, but about the love we choose to give each other." "I will, Mother," young Thomas promised, tears streaming down his face. "I will make sure they all know." And he did. For the rest of his life, he told the story of how Thomas Jennings had met a pregnant mail-order bride and said 5 words that changed everything. He told his children and grandchildren about the power of choosing love, of looking past circumstances to see the person beneath, of building a family based not on biology but on commitment and care. The story became part of the family lore, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren who never met Thomas or Willa still knew the story of how their family began, still carried the values of love and acceptance that had been the foundation of it all. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Thomas and Willa were together again, their love story complete, their legacy secure in the hearts and lives of all those who came after them. It had started with 5 words spoken in a barn in 1878. "That child will be mine too." And from those 5 words had grown a love story for the ages, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy of choosing love over fear that would endure long after the last person who knew them personally had passed from the earth. In the end, that was what mattered. Not that Willa had arrived in Bodie pregnant and alone, not that Thomas had every reason to send her away, but that he had chosen to love her anyway, to claim her child as his own, to build a life with her that exceeded anything either of them could have imagined. It was a story of redemption and grace, of second chances and new beginnings. It was a story of the Wild West, where people reinvented themselves and created new lives from the ashes of old dreams. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple, about 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to hold on tight through whatever came their way. And that choice, made in a moment of courage and compassion in a California barn so long ago, had rippled out through time, affecting hundreds of lives, creating a family, building a legacy that would endure for generations to come. That was the true miracle of Thomas and Willa's story. Not that they had overcome obstacles or survived hardships, though they had done both. The miracle was that they had chosen love when fear would have been easier, acceptance when judgment would have been expected, commitment when walking away would have been understandable. They had taken broken pieces and created something whole. They had taken a desperate situation and transformed it into something beautiful. They had proven that family is not about how you start, but about how you love, how you show up for each other, how you choose to be there day after day, year after year, through all the joys and sorrows that life brings. And in doing so, they had created not just a family, but a legacy of love that would echo through the ages, inspiring their descendants to choose love over fear, acceptance over judgment, hope over despair, just as Thomas and Willa had done on that fateful day in 1878 when 5 simple words changed everything forever.